The coexistence of ugliness and beauty inhabits spaces draping everything in its wake and gives expression to the immanent tension between self-love and appearance, where everything known, no matter how mundane or extraordinary, nightmarish or heavenly, is utilized to further its extremity. The substance examines our relation with body image, its effects on personhood and interpersonal dynamics. It expresses the self-inflicted internalized violence through physical manifestation, thematically exploring body image and ageism as never before. Its inheritance of body horror and gore carries within a history on the search of the grotesque. Styles that break with convention and taste by finding in bodies perfect recipients to experiment and show their endurance, but also their intrinsic vulnerability. Horror provides the security and comfort of facing our fears, a way to confront what nightmares are made of and find joy in the terrifying. Sometimes the terrifying is not a product of exogenic dangers like in films that explore torture, but a product born from our inner selves. The first shots of the film encapsulate the passing of time and how what once shone like a bright star now lies forgotten in the shadows. Violence perpetrated by time is one we as mortal and aging beings cannot escape from. Death is harder for the rich to face than it is for humbler mortals, the rich having so much more to lose and leave behind them, wrote John Pearson in his 1995 book Painfully Rich, J. Paul Getty and His Heirs. In a world in which beauty is coveted and protected like a precious treasure, and no matter where it is looked at, a constant reminder of its importance is actively reinforced, we could paraphrase what Pearson said, getting older is harder for the beautiful than it is for the rest, the beautiful having so much more to lose and leave behind them. Beauty has always been considered to harbor the dominions of youth. It only follows that one presupposes the other. By depicting the effect time has on our appearance, how different we find our reflection to be while looking at the mirror as the years go by and changes manifest, the movie explores the inner violence of aging. Considered as one of the highest currencies we have, beauty is something that cannot be manufactured or bought. Either you have it or you don't, and if you aren't born beautiful, you will never be. To some extent, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, although it seems to be the case where standards exist spatially. It is clear the opacity of appearance cannot be penetrated. Appearance is a prerequisite to personality discovery, it is what makes someone interested in someone else in the first place. How beautiful someone might or might not be on the inside is not relevant when it comes to seeking what the eyes want. If beauty is an asset, then it follows that it can be lost, and if said loss can be described as something painful for most, then it could be described as traumatic for the famous who profit from it and live in the spotlight. This is the predicament of our protagonist, Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, who after turning 50, is fired on the grounds of being old by her boss, producer Harvey, Dennis Quaid, and her life begins to crumble when she becomes absorbed by the idea she is way past her prime. An idea that leads her to the substance, a product that promises to create a better version of yourself. Younger, more beautiful, more perfect. The fading aerobics TV star will find in her new self, Sue, played by Margaret Qualley, an answer to the unstoppable nature of time. Written and directed by Coralie Fargeat, she indicated to be inspired by her own life experiences when creating The Substance. How she learned to be violent about her image and feel it was never enough led her to consider it absurd and question it now that she is approaching 50. The movie pays homage to all the movies she loves that had an impact on her life. From red hallways and bathrooms reminiscent of The Shining, white-tiled minimalistic futuristic spaces and the inclusion of Also Sprach Zarathustra as in 2001 A Space Odyssey, close-ups in the bathroom resembling Psycho, body metamorphosis like in The Fly or The Thing, a disfigured person evoking empathy as in The Elephant Man, to a bloodbath prom-like sequence similar to Carrie, the movie is full of influences. According to Fargeat, she redigests all the movies she watched in her life somewhere. One reference that stands out is a literary one, naturally, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, in which a man manages to elude aging by allowing the signs of the passing of time to appear on a portrait of him and not on himself. In The Substance, by making her pain invisible and her beauty visible, Sue is Dorian, while Elizabeth is the equivalent of the portrait, her body as the canvas in which every change manifests, reminding its subject of her true appearance. Violence externalized in visual elements that testify to our agency of societal beauty standards, where a failure to meet said demands is experienced as unworthiness. By reason of that agentic state, beauty standards are actively craved many times to the detriment of our self-worth, especially when comparison renders its endeavor a seemingly impossible one to achieve. A comparison that enlivens the substance, making beauty and ugliness cohabit in a continuous reinforcement of the presence of the other, sometimes in the same frame, as if for one to exist and be recognized, there needs to be its opposite to give identity and meaning to it. Exposed dichotomies that serve to reinforce substantial differences haunt and remind Elizabeth Sparkle of her perceived inferiority. The massive portrait of herself in her prime is not only a reinterpretation of the classic by Oscar Wilde but also an active memento mori as the TV shows, interviews, and billboards of Sue and her striking beauty and youth that serve as reminders of what could be considered as the society and its difficult-to-achieve beauty standards, and also of her internalization of them and usual self-rejection. Material elements symbolizing what Elizabeth does not have. A duality also present in how Elizabeth and Sue see one another as two separated identities. The voice of the substance is clear when it says, "You are one, you can't escape from yourself." Words that are repeated and meant to be remembered by being included in the last white paper with strong and bold black letters indicating "Remember you are one." This identity dualism is utilized to examine the loneliness and emptiness experienced when you feel you do not deserve to exist anymore. Whether it is due to a lack of popularity, success, attention, or love, the hatred towards other versions of ourselves, how this fight becomes self-destructive and creates obsessions or trivial pleasures to keep us occupied and not think about how awful it is to be ourselves, exemplifies when the need of love is not fulfilled and how obsessions can morph into addictions that destroy us inside and out. The use of body horror is not only as a vehicle to portray self-hatred and inner conflict, but also to elevate the extreme and the uncomfortability. Even if acquainted with La Nouvelle Vague du Cinéma d'Horreur Français and films like Haute Tension from Alexandre Aja, Frontières from Xavier Gens, or Martyrs from Pascal Laugier, the substance achieves freshness and impact. It is not difficult to imagine people leaving the movie theater since it is a movie full of intense scenes challenging you to avert your eyes. Like a physical experience emerging from the screen, Coralie Fargeat creates a world where everything that can have the potentiality of being disturbing is used in extremes to achieve that end. No matter how little or insignificant, she makes the simplest of things, like eating, something grotesque, producing discomfort and disgust, and once you think the movie has exceeded the limits, it goes further and unleashes new doses of grotesqueness. To say that the substance is only a body horror movie, somehow, does not do it justice. While it mostly examines the human body as the recipient of endless alterations, there is a constant search for the physicality of things, animated or not, that exemplifies how the object of nausea can be found around us if looked through the right lens and heard with the required attention. Equally important as the image, the sound design is also responsible for achieving said repulsiveness. It could be considered as having the opposite effect of ASMR. While ASMR produces a tingling, soothing, and pleasant sensation, sound in the substance provides an uncomfortable, unsettling feel, enhancing what the screen is showing. By pushing the boundaries of the grotesque, Coralie Fargeat challenges the normative artistic sensibilities that find in beauty the epitome of artistic expression. Artistic decisions that prove art as a medium of expression is not limited to the search of the pleasant or beautiful. It would be a misnomer to say that the second feature film of Fargeat is only interested in depicting the uncomfortable or disturbing, since it is also drawn to convey their opposites. While maximalist in its depiction of the extreme, it is minimalist in its color-rich settings that emerge as elegant nightmarish fantasy locations and in its eye for detail, capturing images that strike the eye for their boldness. If it is true that some scenes challenge the audience to divert the eyes from the screen, then it is also true temptation is a byproduct of others. Temptation as a direct result of images that woo viewers, keeping them captive, enslaved to what is being depicted by a craved exploitation gaze. Coralie Fargeat channels the other's gaze to exemplify beauty and make of the body a site where the object of desire blooms. This is also the reason for the lack of a fluid sense of sexuality. This lascivious gaze through the lens is present many times, especially when capturing the aerobic scenes of Sue and Pump It Up, with the camera accentuating movements in unitards that embrace every curve of her body. The exaggeration in these scenes, with many close-ups of Sue's glutes, reminds us of the movie's use of humor and its aim at enhancing differences. While Sue is sexualized, the repository of every gaze, Elizabeth never is, and the film emphasizes the most unglamorous parts of her. Owing to a clinical treatment and the often discomforting nature of the situations, something resembling what Yorgos Lanthimos does in his films, the lascivious gaze is absent where nudity is present. Being a satire gives the movie more freedom to explore themes of hypersexuality and society's superficiality in ways that depart from the real. The characters in the movie resemble caricatures, living exaggerated embodiments of what is sometimes considered to be prevalent in media, but also in our daily lives. Decisions to expose or criticize normalized behaviors. The fact that Margaret Qualley has prosthetics to play Sue could be seen as hypocrisy by some critics, one unnecessary addition where none was needed to beautify and make her sexier. But it is clear it could be a reinforcement of the hypersexualization bordering ridiculousness the film aims at, and the furthering of the idea that, for the movie, perfection is only achieved through manipulation and alteration. Considering the sensible nature of its theme, one crossed by ideology where the culprit changes form according to each belief, Fargeat achieves a realistic and unbiased depiction of it. One that dismantles the architecture of subjection, where identity is nothing but a mirror, sometimes facing the subject, sometimes not. It would be tempting to see Harvey as a villain, as the person responsible for Elizabeth's demise. But is he really one? A label as this would infer more power than he really has. As a studio executive, he is a vessel for people's preferences. In his own words, "I have to give people what they want. That's what keeps the shareholders happy." His decision to fire Elizabeth and hire Sue, and make the aerobics TV show Beautiful and Happy like her, seems to have worked since ratings increased afterwards. This is why, even if questionable, Harvey is no more than the voice of the people, of societal norms whose authorship is never singular. Preferences internalized and reproduced by Elizabeth, rendering her life a sanctuary of beauty and banishment of ugliness, especially when looking at herself in the mirror and only seeing what is wrong, and when she makes plain her feelings towards herself when trying to revive Sue. "I hate myself. You're the only lovable part of me." Aspects like this are naturally expressing the idea that while retreating into the facade of a haven, reproducing normativities actively harming us, an emancipatory escape from subjection will only be a fantasy. And while a horror satire, the substance, at its core, is a profound exploration of body image. If self-worth is only derived from appearance, and if value is only found in youth, then it will naturally diminish along with it as the years pass. The lengths we can go to change ourselves as if image were not only the most important aspect but also what defines us means, on the one hand, if perfection is not achieved, we are before a life of ill-treatment, and on the other, if perfection is achieved, our worth and the affection derived from it will be not because of our personality but by reason of how we look, objectivized pretty objects. In creating Monstro Elisa Sue, Fargeat indicated an intention for it to evoke empathy, even with a monstrous appearance. An appearance externalizing our mental deformation and how violent we are to ourselves. Our fear of not being loved, of being different, of being judged, enliven Monstro in its fragility and tenderness behind its flesh. This is the reason for the sadness of the story. The substance is impactful not solely by reason of its use of graphic and shocking imagery, but also by how profound its message is. The beauty of what Coralie Fargeat created is in not subordinating the concept to gratuitous gore, and it succeeds precisely because behind all the body horror, she is telling us something important, and we should listen. The idea of symbolically disappearing while no longer young or beautiful and with that the feeling of not mattering anymore, and the solitariness and hatred that comes with it, is sadly real. Something most people can connect with,